and today we get high on the marijuana conspiracy. You like what I did there? On Film Dirt Reviews. I'm Alan Ning, I was Zorianna Kit, and today we review the marijuana conspiracy. In 1972, young women looking for a fresh start in life endure isolated captivity for a true 98-day human experiment studying the effects of marijuana on females. Directed by Pryce, stars Julia Sarah Stone, Morgan Kohan, Brittany Bristow, Kyla Avril Young. Yeah, this is interesting. This is a real story, a real experiment where they took, I believe it was 24 women, and they isolated them and checked on the effects marijuana would have. They had a control group, not a control group. You know how experiments work. So what did you think of the marijuana conspiracy?
You know, the title made me think that it was going to be a lot more interesting than it was. I enjoyed watching the movie because this was based on something that actually did happen, but I was a little bit bored. I didn't feel like a driving force that was really compelling me. I mean, we spend a lot of time with these girls. We get to know them. We get to know their backstories. But all of that just was very kind of simple and dull amidst this backdrop of this isolated space that they're in. And it made me think of the film The Stanford Experiment that I saw several years back, which is that Stanford University did this controlled experiment with a bunch of guys. And that film, there was so much, tension going on. And I guess I thought there would be more tension in this one, and there wasn't.
Yeah, I kind of saw this as an after-school special. It's based on a real experiment, but it didn't feel like it was the actual experiment. I just felt like it was a bunch of stories about a diverse group of women doing pot and seeing where they go. And it just it's kind of like in a scientific experiment, you don't want to introduce outside factors, but in this one, the scientific experiment, they're introducing a truly diverse cast. Here's a woman in this situation, in that situation, in this situation. There's even a side LGBT subplot that goes on. And it just, so to me, the movie was less about the actual experiment, but it was about what it was like being a woman in the 70s. There's a lot of misogyny going on. The LGBT story, the aversion therapy.
Yeah.
It just kind of all over the place. And I guess it was more or less a way to tell stories about women, but under this kind of setting of a science experiment.
Which I just sort of felt was a little misleading, because I got in the mood to watch one thing, and then I was being handed something else. And it was like I had to just kind of reconcile that in my head. And what I was watching unfold wasn't that terribly exciting.
It was to me very checkboxy, where we have to have this. There's an African-American woman whose father was in jail for selling marijuana, and she's trying to go to college and get an education. Another girl was cast out of her home by her family and has no home.
The homeless girl who doesn't look like she's homeless one bit.
That one. And then and like I said, it's just a lot of checkboxes and stories. And I think I'm just curious, but maybe if they hadn't sold you on the fact that it was a science experiment, do you think you might have looked upon the film differently?
Maybe. But perhaps. But then again, there were too many girls to sort of follow. Like, there was one who's from a wealthy family whose mom accidentally has some brownies and gets high, and then but see that her privilege is never quite like expanded upon once she's in isolation with these other girls. That's kind of that. And she eventually, I think, leaves, or she misses her mom and leaves. So with that many women, we don't necessarily do a deep dive into particular issues. They're all kind of very surfacey, very, very surfacey. So I didn't have anyone to attach myself to and kind of follow along. There wasn't even a particular viewpoint that we start following. Like who is our person that's kind of taking us through this movie? There isn't.
I liken this a lot to Meatballs. These summer camp comedies. They're not teenagers; they're young women, but it's the same idea. They're locked away from society, and they have to interact, and they have different personalities. And we find comedy, but this is not a comedy, so to speak. It's a very light. If it is, it's a light comedy, very light drama. Stakes are somewhat low, except maybe the LGBT storyline. I think it does suffer from this idea of this is what I'm expecting, and this is what I got. And I feel like there needs to be better build up, better selling of the movie as to what it actually is, because I think people are going to get turned off by that. Yeah, and then also it's a marijuana film, and I've seen my fair share of marijuana comedies, and I don't think it ever got to those levels, and it's weird, but because I think they're trying to be fairly realistic with what marijuana does, but at the same time, I can't really pinpoint a moment where I said, "Oh, well, they're clearly stoned," other than the fact that there are moments that they had to have of being clearly stoned. Otherwise, they seem very, very clear and level-headed, as if marijuana does nothing to them.
Well, I mean, some of the reactions of, I don't know if it's the actresses, if it's the acting or the directing, but when they smoked those joints, then they would start giggling. So it was like, okay, so they're giggling now, so they're high. So anytime they're giggling and being silly, they're high. Or if she's looking at her hand through a stained glass, like, okay, she's stoned. But I mean, so what do you do with that? Like, what's more to that? Like, because a lot of the things that we're told, the scientist tells another, his boss, well, they're more productive, or they've done really well, and because they have to do this macrame and earn money during the day. So they're like, oh, they're very productive, or they're very this, but we don't see that. We're just being told what they are seeing as they're studying these women. But we don't see that for ourselves, so we can't really draw any conclusions, and we can't really notice things and say, oh, okay, yes, I see that, because that's just never shown.
Yeah. And you bring up the thing we haven't even talked about, which is the conspiracy. It's the whole premise of the film is basically the idea that the government was looking for a certain outcome, and when the experiment wasn't proving their beliefs about marijuana, they did what all governments do. And it shouldn't surprise you here. And this is Canada.
Yeah.
I won't spoil the ending, but I mean, this is, the whole conspiracy, the marijuana conspiracy, really takes a back seat to the story of these women. And I think it's unmet expectations. I think that's the biggest problem of the film.
I did like how, because it's set in the 70s, there were shots, like new shots of like Pierre Trudeau, Canada's prime minister, like talking or walking. And then the very last scene of the film, which I think was added in way after the fact, just because of the irony, is that then they cut to now, where his son, Justin Trudeau, who's the prime minister of Canada today, legalizing and doing all that sort of stuff. So it was really funny to see the two generations of Trudeau's being prime minister of Canada and implementing, and dealing with the marijuana situation.
All right. So I'm getting the sense that you're not giving it a glowing review. It unfulfilled expectations. I think that's what we're saying. And it just didn't really have a clear, this is what this movie is about. And so I'm gonna guess you gave it a 4.
No, actually, no, I didn't. Not so low. I mean, maybe I am misrepresenting myself, because I actually gave it a 6.5, because it just, there wasn't anything so, like, I can't point to something and say, oh, this was terrible or this was terrible. There wasn't anything so terrible. It's just, it was just a little boring, and what happens in the movie doesn't match to the title. So it's just wrong. It was just wrong in that regard. So I didn't dislike it. I was just a little bored, because that's not what I signed up for to watch in my mind. So I do give it a 6.5, because it's, it is based on a true story. It does show this time of women in the 70s, and if you're interested in that, you might want to check it out. But if you're not interested in that, then you really don't need to see this movie. But yeah, I definitely knew I was going to give it something above 5. It's not as bleak as a 4. Gosh, now I have to figure out what you would give it. I mean, I was surprised that you thought I'd give it a 4. Please tell me you gave it something above a 5.
Yeah, I gave it 5.5. There are things to like about it. I think the not so homeless looking actress was pretty good. There's some good performances, some funny bits, but I just wish the movie had focused on something. Had spent its energy telling something specific. Otherwise, it just became, a muddy stew, so to speak, and that's kind of how I walked away from it.
Yeah, so, agreed.
Yeah. All right. So with that, be sure to like, subscribe, comment below on what you thought of the marijuana conspiracy. Happy 420. And with that, let's get out of here.